I'm Lori Alleman, and it's my pleasure to welcome you to MSS Business Transformation Institute's webinar on high-performance team development. We're glad you could join us today. Before I introduce David, just a few notes. We are recording the webinar, and it will be available on our website, MSSBTI.com, and there will be time at the end for questions. I'm happy to introduce today's webinar presenter, David Lee, Executive Director of the MSS Business Transformation Institute here in Phoenix. David is a global executive with experience developing business relationships in Asia, Latin America, Europe, and the Middle East. He has over 20 years of executive management experience in Fortune 500, mid-sized companies, as well as startups. He's a highly regarded facilitator, writer, and public speaker on topics including business transformation, managing complexity, disruptive innovation, organizational change management, and responsive organizations. Welcome, David.
Thank you, Lori, and thanks for reading the introduction that I wrote for you. So we're going to do a case study today on our high-performance team development methodology. High-performance team development is one of our accelerated programs. Our acceleration programs are short, facilitated interventions designed to help organizations going through major change and helping them get out of the gate faster to be more successful determining, aligning around, and implementing their changes so that they realize the benefits more fully and faster. Our programs help with strategy and planning, leadership readiness, team development, and change management, as well as specific programs on things like customer-centric transformation. If you're interested in these, please go to MSSBTI.com to learn more. This specific program is a unique method for facilitating increased communications, collaboration, and decision-making across teams at all levels of any organization. Sorry. So this case study is about high-performance team development. This is a world-class innovative program. It was actually developed by a fellow named Radvan Babu of Charles University in Prague. He's a friend of mine. He's a unique combination of talents, and he's both a mathematician and a psychologist. We partner with QED Group in Europe, and MSS is the certified program facilitator. This accelerated approach is designed for immediate impact for any teams that are utilizing it. We have same session development, facilitation, and planning. So all of that occurs in any of the sessions that we run. We have a staged approach so that we have some immediate progress, and it's customizable to fit any current team situation. It's been utilized by respected global organizations, some of which include Dell, T-Mobile, the European Space Agency, Jackson Health System, a company called Home Credit, which is growing massively globally, and it's also a primary tool of the special forces in both Europe and NATO. What we really like about it, and the reason we chose to use this tool and this facilitation method, is it's very graphical and it's easy to grasp. It's designed to simplify complex relationship dynamics. It provides intuitive visual imaging of organizational relationships, and it develops organizational and individual plans for high performance. The graphical tool is a landscape type format, so and it uses relational positioning based on answers provided by all team members. So we'll send out a survey, and all the team members will answer that survey. It's a very simple survey for each session, usually somewhere around 10 to 15 minutes to take, and then it'll take all the input from all the people, and it'll create the graphical images like the ones you see here. The 3D usage indicates the average score based on the inquiries, and it's designed to where you see the sharpness of it, the heat. The more towards the red it is, it'll give you one answer, and then the other answer is proximity depending on the question. It can be utilized, it can be used at different angles so that you can see the relational positioning differently, and it can also be rescaled so that you can exaggerate the effects and talk about them. The way we start is we will start with the current state, and it provides a tool for representing current state and desired state and tracking progress over time. We'll work with the team to create the action plans and during the facilitation. So we first identify the current state, we then identify the desired state, and these form in a matter of minutes after taking the survey. We can do it live, or we can do it before the actual session. We then facilitate a discussion on how to get from the current state to the desired state, what are the challenges and opportunities to move forward. Once we've done that, we create a plan, an action plan for the team to carry forward, and then we can monitor progress in the future. It provides a very cool way of tracking things that you otherwise wouldn't be able to track, like how is the team communicating and is their communication getting better? How is the team collaborating, and how are they making decisions? Are they moving towards where they want to be? Now, when I do this, I've often asked, can I see an example from a team that's a high-performing team to compare it to what we've done? The trick is that this is all relative. So if you're already a high-performing team, you're going to rate yourself a certain way, and you're going to find ways to improve. So what you think is a moderate result, it might be a fantastic result for another team. So it's based on your team and how you visualize and perceive your team and where you want to go. So let's get into the case a little bit. So this is a case, we genericized it so that the client is not identified, but it's a client that's existed for over 100 years. They're a billion-dollar organization. They have 12 autonomous business units, relatively autonomous business units. The business units in this case the business unit that we're measuring in this team is a team of 12. They're in the technology organization. The leader is the CTO. They have 5 vice presidents, 4 directors, a PMO, and an admin. One of the key points of this is that this is an organization that had to go through a major change about 3 years ago due to several issues that caused the team to turn over 50%. So the CTO was brought in after an incident. The team was turned over 50%, so half the people are new, half the people are legacy. The current team as they exist has been in place for 2 years, but they're still experiencing issues coming together as a team, implementing their new vision for their organization, and the legacy team members are hesitant to make decisions. The group is additionally hampered by a larger organization that they're a part of that's struggling to set and implement new visions of their own, and new initiatives are often encumbered by red tape and bureaucracy. A lot of this is due to declining sales. The organization's industry itself is experiencing exponential change. So they're in an organization that's experiencing change within an industry that's experiencing change. So there's a lot going on. The goal of this program was that the CTO came to us saying, I need to identify opportunities to improve the performance of my team. After 2 years, she was not satisfied with the way the team was coming together and delivering on the vision. And she wanted to make the team dynamics better. They wanted to be faster. They wanted to be more collaborative. So we took this case and we started with our normal process. We start with a 15-minute survey that we send out to the team. We have 3 sessions. Each session has a series of action plans that result out of it. And the sessions are conducted by a facilitator and then followed up by one-to-one coaching where necessary. The topics covered in each session include, first session would be communication, second session is on cooperation, and session 3 is on leadership and decision making. So each session gets more personal and more intense as we go. Our recommendation is these sessions are conducted with a time period in between. In this case, there was a month in between. It could be weeks or days in between, but it gives the team time to absorb what they learned from each session, and it gives them time to advance based on the results. Each session will have a set of questions that we work on, and they're designed to be progressive. So they get used to the process in the first session, they get used to the openness, they get used to how it's conducted, and they get used to having very frank conversations. Starting with communication, which pretty much everybody can agree that communication always needs to be improved. But then in session two, we get into more things around cooperation, collaboration, and it gets more personal, asking questions about availability to others, reliability, your willingness to help people, your openness. And then in session 3, we get into even more personal things on how decisions are made, leadership skills, are you aligned with the team, are your interests aligned with the team, and what influence do you have on decision making? So it becomes progressively more intense. The programs each will result with plans that team has facilitated, has had facilitated. They put the plans together on how they're going to move forward. It's something that they own, they buy into. Our role as facilitators is simply to make sure that we're taking note and moving the conversation along and providing a safe environment for those conversations. But the results are results that they've developed, and they develop them at a team level, which we'll go through, and they also will develop them at a individual level, which we won't highlight in this case study, but we will show some of those results. So looking at the team action plan that they developed at the end of this, all 3 sessions, here are some of the issues that they took on and developed plans around for improvement. First one is building trust in decision making. So this organization found that because of the previous issues, because they had half the team was new, half the team was legacy, the legacy part of the team had been through the previous challenges, there had not been a lot of trust built up between the leadership, the CTO, and her team. At the same time, the team had not shown that they were able to be trusted because they had always deferred to the leader. So they had to start a process by which they could validate the decision-making capabilities and trust each other, and that was going to take some time, but we could actually, now that we've identified that, we could actually put in a plan for that so that the authority could be more distributed throughout the organization. The next thing that they had decided, they wanted to have more knowledge about what each other was doing. What were the incentives? What were the KPIs? What were the things that were driving each of the team members? And that way they could help each other more and they could be a part of each other's development. They were a technology team. They had a lot of issues. They had often the resolution process for a lot of those issues took a long time. It took a lot of energy. It took a lot of resource, and sometimes the issues were not resolved in a timely manner. And if they could fix that, they could become more efficient as an organization. They had this tension that was revealed during this process between firefighting, constantly firefighting, and having they're a very customer-focused group, but that meant that they were always trying to solve problems, and that took away from their chance to plan the future. And of course, the irony behind that is if you can't plan the future, if you can't plan how you're going to improve as an organization, you can't really reduce the firefighting, and so you get into a loop that it's hard to get out of, and that was identified that this group is definitely in that loop. They also didn't have a way of telling each other how they like to communicate. There wasn't any feedback on how they communicate, and so they needed to develop that process to say, this is how I prefer to be communicated to, this is how I respond, this is creating that cadence between the team. We identified specifically an issue with a role, which is in, as we go through the case, you'll see the VP of R&D, or the innovator role. And you'll see that in a lot of cases, that person is highly isolated. As we go through the case, you'll see this more and more, and it became a topic. And we almost immediately revealed that this was a disjoint between the CTO and the VP of R&D in terms of his role. The CTO, she thought that she had put this person in place to lead the organization into the future, to drive them forward. The person who was in that role kind of saw themselves as a person put out to pasture and was sort of the librarian for the group. By identifying that, we could redesign the role, redesign the expectations of the role, and move the organization forward faster. That was done within the first few minutes, by the way, of the first session. Then we had leadership development and coaching needs were identified all the way from the top down. And mostly they wanted to keep momentum going, and they didn't want to lose what they had done here, so they signed up to do some tracking on this and do some future work as well. So again, this is the plan that the team themselves developed and is pursuing. They also had individual action plans because at the end of each session, or as part of each session, they will receive individual reports, but there will also be, through discussion, things that they all need to work on as parts of the team. And so what we've laid out here is some of them had very strong strengths that came out of this process, some of them had some improvement areas, and they of course all had areas that they needed some real development behind, and that became part of their individual plans. All the people involved know the individual plans for all the people involved, so they can help them, and it's very transparent. So this is for every person on the team, all the way through all 3 sessions. So getting into the specific case, I'm going to walk you through the questions that were answered and some of the results for each one. The first one is a very simple one. It's just on how important is communication to you in your role with the people that you work with. So if you look at this, this is a good way of looking at how the chart works. If communication with a specific person is critically important, it'll be hot. It'll be more towards red. So in this case, you can see the CTO is in the center and is in a orange coloring and is therefore very important to everybody on the team. How they're clustered together in proximity is who they mutually say they need to be communicating with and the level of importance of that person to you. So they're all very clustered together in this point, so they all see each other as fairly and moderately to highly important. By the way, on the right on the chart, we discovered out of 12 people in this group, we actually had 2 that were colorblind. So we've laid this out as well so that you can see where people lay based on the numbers. In some cases, that means that we're clustering people together pretty closely, so it's sometimes difficult to read, but that right side is meant for the people who can't see color. The other thing to note on this and how important it is that what we're talking about in all these questions is perception. And this is emphasized throughout the program. When we're not talking about necessarily is reality. So I may see somebody as extremely important for me to communicate with. Whether that's true or not is not really the question. The question is, how do I perceive that? And so when we get into things like leadership skills and capabilities, a person on the chart might be rated moderate in terms of their leadership skills. That doesn't mean that's the reality. They may have incredible leadership skills, but that's the perception of the people around them. And so what we're dealing with here is perceptions, not necessarily performance. Now, as we go through the cases, I'd like people to pay attention to 2 specific people listed here. We can pay attention to all 12, but just for simplicity's sake, we want to focus on 2 people. That's the CTO and the VP of R&D. And they're going to have their own stories as we go through this and their own effect. Here, what we're seeing is importance of communication, and it very closely reflects the actual organizational structure of the company, with the CTO in the middle, the direct reports somewhere very close in proximity, and then some of the administrative people, the VP of transformation, who's the liaison, some of the people on the outer ring of the group. This very much reflects how they're actually organized if you looked at their hierarchy. As we go into frequency of communication, this is their current level that they communicate with each other, and we see some immediate results right away. When we go through this, I will ask on each picture for the team to give their reflection on what they're seeing. And what jumps out here is that VP of R&D, the innovator of the team, is very much isolated. Not communicating very frequently and not clustered with the rest of the group. So there's an immediate result that we see here, and is that the case, first of all, is the first question we ask. And then the second question we ask is, should that be the case? So this started to create a conversation around that role. And we immediately, again, identified that there was a disconnect between the CTO's perception of that role and the person who was in that role. The CTO, she thought this was a role that was going to lead that team forward, and the person who was in that role thought they had been put in that role so they could collect their points and retire. That disconnection had been going on for 2 years We identified it in 5 minutes. And that changed a lot of how that group was going to be functioning in the future. The next picture shows how their desired frequency of communication comes out. So each team member, by the way, will get an individual report that will show them who desires greater contact, and they will see if that contact is mutual. They will then be able to get together together face to face and discuss how they want to, what that communication really means, because somebody might say they want to communicate more frequently, but they'll also get into what is that, how they want to be communicated, and in what way. So I might say to one of my colleagues that I want to communicate more frequently, but I'm actually sitting next to that person talking to them every day. That person may be very confused, and it really comes down to, I need you to give me specific information on a consistent basis. If they're not comfortable doing that, then we can come in and we can mediate those discussions. When we get into knowledge of work, this is their current knowledge of work. You can see it's fairly moderate. The group decided, and you'll see that they decided they wanted to see a higher knowledge of each other's work. The real question here is, do they clearly understand the goals and of the other people, how they're measured, how they're incentive, and therefore do they know how they can help each other improve? When we get into the desired knowledge of work, you can see that they move from a moderate standing to a much higher standing of at least very well or perfectly well desired knowledge of work. So they all want to know more about what the other people are incented to do and how they're measured. That way they can help each other, and they can understand how to get better together. Now, here again, you can see that VP of R&D, the innovator, is still in that moderate view. We're still seeing some lingering of the role perception, and it shows that the team itself had some perception of that role that was the same as the person themselves, and not as a leader of the organization like the CTO intended. And we're getting into quality of communication with the next image. Now, there is some ambiguity on some of the images in some cases, and one of the questions here is, what does quality mean? So we will, before we get into this image, talk to the team and say, how do you define quality? What do you mean by quality? And we'll do that several times throughout these programs. They will answer the question with more of the ambiguous thought process, and then when we get into the session, we'll come up with a facilitated discussion, then show them the image. That way they develop a shared understanding, and it deflects personal issues that they may have in terms of trying to define quality and having a different definition as they go in and view the image. We get a shared understanding of what it is, and it also helps them understand what people were perceiving when they answered these questions. We get into importance of cooperation. You can see here that this is now in the beginning, first question of the second session. And you can see here that we have two people really at the center here. That's the CTO and the VP of security. What we're starting to see now is the trust issue starting to raise its head. The CTO becomes very important to almost everything that is done within the organization. And of course, because they had some challenges in the past, the VP of security, and here we're talking about data security, is also very important to almost everything the organization does. We get into effectiveness of cooperation. This would have been almost on a normal scale been a flat green. So we have actually rescaled it so that we could see the differences of everybody. And so here we're getting in, and what we're doing on this image with the team is we're getting into some of the discussions on the firefighting that they're doing to meet their customer demands, distracting from opportunities to move the organization forward, which you'll see continues into the next image as well. So here again we have availability to others. part of the reason there's only a level of moderate availability, as the team described it, is because they're always spending time fighting fires. They're always meeting to solve today's issue. They're always trying to work the politics of the organization to defend themselves. So there's a big challenge around fighting organizational fires, and that affects their availability to each other. Now, when they do get a chance to rely on each other, they find everybody in the group seems to be fairly highly reliable. So if you can trust them, once they take something on, once they say they're going to do something, you can trust them to do it. Now, here again, we're starting to see the R&D role being questioned again, because the goals and responsibilities became a topic, and they needed to define and rethink this role. Here again, it's not the person, but the perception of the role and what that person should be doing. Are they separate from the organization, or are they an integral part of how the organization moves forward? In this next question, we get into willingness to help. Are they willing to help each other? This is now where we start seeing the perception of the CTO and how people feel about her approach show up, and you'll see through the rest of the case, we start learning a lot about how the team perceives their primary leader. Now, she thinks of herself as an open, transparent, and approachable leader, but that's not necessarily the perception of the team. Again, here when we get into cooperation, here the CTO is learning about how other people perceive her. She feels very willing to be open to others, to be cooperative with others, has an open door policy, but in truth, when people see how her demeanor is and her directness and the way she questions, she appears very intimidating. So people don't necessarily feel like they want to cross that threshold to go into that open door. And in fact, they feel like they have to prepare highly for every interaction with her. So other leaders in the organization are actually seen as more open. Specifically in this case, you can see that the VP of Security and the VP of ERP, two direct reports, are the people that they rely on for openness. We get into effective listening. This is another one of those ambiguous terms where we will spend time defining it with the team before we actually get into the image. The CTO here again is moderate and sits outside the group. That means that she is being not seen as a very effective listener, and she's not interacting with the group as a result. Again, the challenge here is the way that her demeanor is and how she questions things and how she challenges people. This is the point, by the way, that she suggested that she may need some leadership coaching and asked for some help in acquiring that. In the next image, we're entering into the third session. This is the first one of the third session. We're getting more and more personal, but by now the team is actually, and we're into our third month, so you have to think of it in that way. By now the team is getting more and more used to being open and frank in discussions. And at this point, they're often very excited to even get into this meeting because they're ready to handle their issues, they're ready to talk to each other, and they're all ready to start improving. Not every team is like that, but this team certainly was. The first image here on dependence in decision making reflects the heavy dependence on the CTO for decision making. Every decision was flowing up to the CTO. So we're back into, and now we're really starting to tackle those trust issues. The CTO does not have full trust in a team that doesn't appear willing to make decisions and to be accountable for their decisions. She feels like she's pushed them to make decisions for themselves, but eventually all the decisions come to her. The team, on the flip side of that, has not necessarily earned that trust. And so we had to think about how could they do that. For example, they could validate decisions that they already made with the CTO. We could start with some specific decisions that they're coached on by the CTO, and then we see the results from there. So we had to build that trust over time in the future along the team, and that was really starting to be revealed at this point. Now here we have effectiveness of decision making. I think it's very important when we talk about this one is that we're not talking about how well the decisions turned out. What we're talking about here is the importance of decision making over the how available the person is. So if they're very important to your process but they're not available, then they're not seen as very effective. They're very important to your process and they are available, then they are extremely effective in what they're doing. Discussion here came back to both issues impacting availability, which is we're not very available for each other because we're always firefighting and trying to deal with problems, and back to importance, which is, again, that trust issue. So the fact that it's pretty high here is good. In most of the cases where there is a moderate rating, it's usually because of the availability over trust. The next one is on sharing relevant information. This was all pretty much flat green until we rescale it. The discussion here centers on what is relevant information. To understand what is relevant from one person to another person really depends on your knowledge of people's work. So by solving the problems that were revealed earlier, or the desire that was revealed earlier to know more about each other's work and your incentives and your approach and so forth, that would play a lot into making the sharing of relevant information better. R&D here again is a question, because it became a question of what is actually relevant in the innovation, and there was a difference in perception. Here, what's reflecting is the current state, but the discussion came to that person should be much more in the center, and the sharing of information back and forth from innovation should be happening a lot more. And in fact, that should be a key integral part of how the organization is planning its future. So when we come to the next one, which is leadership skills, this is where we get probably the most personal. This is a leadership team, so discussion of leadership skills affects them and affects their perception of themselves very strongly. So again, here we have a pre-discussion, and quite an in-depth one, on what are leadership skills, and more importantly, what are leadership skills in this organization that are seen as valuable, and how to improve your skills, and what are the methods that you can use to improve those skills is a discussion we have before we ever reveal the imaging here. You can see if you're on this team and you're looking this openly and it's revealed and you see where the CTO is lying, you see that she's going to learn much from this image, but what it's really doing is it's reinforcing much of what we've already learned about how people are perceiving her as a leader. And it shows that other leaders in the organization are seen as quite capable and warranting of trust. So again, this is reinforcing the need for coaching and the need for the change of perception and the need to distribute more decision making and trust the team better. The next one on team alignment is asking a very unique question. Are the people setting aside their personal interests or their professional interests to help the team reach more agreement and alignment more easily? And this one really stands out when you look at where the CTO is positioned. She is the leader, yet she's positioned far from the group in the upper left-hand corner. This was a huge revelation for the CTO, who did not see herself as somebody who might be self-interested, but that people were perceiving her that way. Now, the discussion from the team that the CTO instigated this program specifically, that she's the one who started this process of high-performance team development, showed that she was a brave leader who wanted to know these things, and just by doing this exercise, this changed her perception. She was taking input, she was understanding her team, she was understanding their perception of how they needed to improve, and she was including them in the process. So this is something that was done before this process. after this process, tracking it, just doing this changed a lot of that perception. Resolving this perception would play a big role into the future of this team. And the final one, which is the only one that's a typical chart, looks at influence on decision making. And you can see from this that for a leadership team, the leaders in the team did not feel that they had a great influence. And this came back again to that trust conversation that had been a theme throughout the program. So those are the questions that were asked, the discussions and highlight that went forward that allowed them to build this team, to build their plan going forward on how they were going to be a better functioning team. This occurred in 3 sessions, 3 90-minute sessions, and over a period of 3 months. Again, that could be a period of 3 weeks, or it could be a period of really 3 days. So if you're interested in learning more about this and possibly utilizing this for your team, please contact us. The contact's on the screen. You can contact me personally at any time about this. You can also visit our website, MSSBTI.com, visit our LinkedIn page, visit my Twitter account. So at this point, I'm going to leave it open to any questions that people might have. Please indicate if you have a question.
David, I have a question.
Okay. Well, thank you, Laura.
So this exercise was focused on this team of 12 that was put together, and the results are based on that. Now, what happens to those results? Do they become invalid when you have team members that leave and then others that join in? Does that mean that there needs to be a reassessment on a regular basis?
Well, we recommend that the teams, once they start to engage us, they do regular assessments on it, because there will inevitably be changes. There will be changes, team members coming in, team members going out, teams will grow. And so by doing this on a regular basis, and not big 90-minute sessions, the facilitate sessions so much, but maybe every quarter just redoing this and looking at the image, and one of the things we do is train them how to read that image. They can become very good at it themselves. So we maybe do an hour debrief every time we run it. But yeah, it needs to be looked at pretty consistently if it's going to continue to improve. And again, I think it's very important to note that there's a relevancy here. So your team may improve massively, but they're still going to be looking at your results based on where you are today. So you may already be a high-performing team getting better, if that makes sense.
I see.
I think one other thing that was asked over the chat, by the way, if you want to send a message and ask a question over the chat, you can, was how big are the teams that this is good for? So generally, you need at least 4 people on a team for this to work well, and we try to limit it to 20. That said, we can do divisions of organizations, and it can. So instead of having an individual there, for example, the CTO or the VP of marketing, you'll have the marketing division, you'll have the finance division, and we can roll up as many as people under that as possible.
I had a question.
Okay. I have questions from in the room. Yes, Jessica.
You mentioned earlier that some results that look moderate for a high-performing team can be fantastic for a team that needs a little bit more in that area. So I'm wondering, should every team kind of aim for their own individual goals, or should there be something that's kind of like across the board, this is what your high-performance team looks like?
In this case, it will be relative to where you are as a team. Now, there's other things that we can do to say, how do we benchmark that performance or that functional role against other organizations. We have a partnership with a group called APQC, provides benchmarking. We have some history that we've done with other groups. We can do that, but this specific thing is to help this team look at how they interact and collaborate together and how they improve what they do specifically.
Yeah.
Okay.
Well, thank you, David, and thank you to our listeners. Be sure to check out MSSBTI.com for more information about our workshops and our acceleration programs. And this concludes today's webinar. Thank you.